Chapter 5. Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, while he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God which was in Jerusalem, and the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines drank in them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver and of brass and of iron, of wood and of stone. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand, and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaister on the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against the other. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, Whosoever shall read this writing, and shew me the interpretation thereof, shall be clothed in scarlet, and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonied. Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house, and the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of thy father light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar thy father, the king, I say thy father, thy made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. For as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams, and showing of hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show thee the interpretation. Then was Daniel brought in before the king, and the king spoke and said unto Daniel, Art thou that Daniel, which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? I have even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. Now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing and make known unto me the interpretation thereof, but they could not shew the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of thee that thou canst make interpretations and dissolve doubts. Now if thou canst read the writing and make known to me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed in scarlet, and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, Let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing unto the king, and make known to him the interpretation. O thou king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom, and majesty, and glory, and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would he slew, and whom he would he kept alive, and whom he would set up, and whom he would put down. But when his heart was lifted up, and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whomsoever he will. And thou his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all this, but hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven. And they have brought the vessels of the house before thee, and thou and thy lords, and thy wives, and thy concubines have drunk wine in them. And thou hast praised the gods of silver, and of gold, and of brass, iron, wood, and stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know, and the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified. Then was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the writing that was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances and found wanting. Peres, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet, and put a chain of gold about his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him, that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. And that night Belshazzar the king of the Chaldeans was the king of and that night was Belshazzar the king of the Chaldeans slain. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. One of the occasional, very poor and very weak criticisms of the Bible not being true is some scholar deciding that Belshazzar wasn't really the king. And we know he wasn't really the king. His father, Nabonius, was the main king, but he let his son rule. And since this is a record of the Jews, and since they had to deal with Belshazzar, as far as they were concerned, as far as Daniel was concerned, Belshazzar was the king. Now, one of the things that happened was when Nebuchadnezzar, when he captured Jerusalem, took the vessels out of the temple, all the things that they used in the temple, they were gold and silver, and took them and put them in the temple of the god Bel, or Marduk, in Babylon. And one night, while there is 1,000 people that are having a drinking party at Belshazzar's palace, he decides to take these vessels of the Lord and bring them out and hand them out to everybody, and they drink wine out of them. Now, in and of themselves, that may or may not be a terrible thing, but what they did was they always poured out some of it to the gods as a libation. And so this was really offensive to the Lord, to have his vessels from his temple used to worship other gods. Shouldn't have done that. Anyway, so all of a sudden the hand appears and writes on the wall. That's where the phrase handwriting on the wall comes from. I mean, this is the end time. This is now it. You have been big time serious, and things are going to happen here now. It says his joints of his loins are loose, and basically it means that he couldn't stand up and his knees are knocking. He offered Daniel the opportunity to be clothed in scarlet, have a gold chain around his neck, and be the third ruler. So there's Nabonius, which was Belshazzar's dad, who was the main king, then Belshazzar, and then there would be Daniel. Daniel says, let thy gifts be to thyself, give your rewards to other people. I don't want anything. Because he realizes something. He's going to have to tell this guy some really bad news. So the basic overall thing is the Babylonian Empire is going to end now. Meaning means that basically God has numbered the days of the Babylonian Empire, and the days of the kingdom are over. Tekel, which is short for shekel, basically means it's been weighed in the balance and found wanting. In other words, there's no reason to continue this thing. And Belshazzar has also been found wanting. It's just deficient in everything. It's no good. Perez, which means division, means that the empire is going to be divided between the Medes and the Persians. Now, Belshazzar rewarded Daniel, and we think the reason, he might have wanted to see if by rewarding Daniel, if he could put this off, but it didn't help anyway, because Babylon was overthrown in one night. Belshazzar was killed that very night. Greek historian Herodotus tells us that even though the walls of Babylon were 100 feet thick and 300 feet high, and it was surrounded by the Euphrates River, that Darius the Persian diverted the river. And so where the river went up against the walls, there were places where the water was only ankle deep, and his troops could enter the city. And the city surrendered almost immediately, because Darius had made a pledge that there would be no terror, no looting, and that everything would be restored the way it should be. So instead of being a horrible conqueror, he was a liberator. And so in one night, Darius captured Babylon. The Lord's prophecy given through Daniel was perfectly true.